Okay. I am back with Greg Lukianoff, everybody. Welcome back. I think this is your third time on Walk-Ins Welcome. Am I correct?
Yes, it's so great to see you, Bridget.
You too. How are you doing?
Busy.
Busy?
We got a lot going on.
It seems that way. You have a very splashy profile in the New York Times today. Congratulations.
Well, thank you. No, it's the photo shoot that convinced me I need to start my diet today.
I love those rock bottom photos. We were just actually on vacation and somebody took a picture, and my sisters and I were just sharing all of it. And we're like, this is our rock bottom shot. This is my rock bottom shot. You're like, this is the moment. Yeah, no, you look great. I don't, how long has that been in the works?
It's been a couple of weeks, and we were pretty nervous about it because we, be honest, historically haven't gotten very good treatment by the New York Times. I have lots
Hmm.
of horror stories. But then when it came out, I was like, okay, this is. I think they're actually being pretty fair to us,
Do you
so I'll
see,
take it.
do you see like a tide turning in that respect?
Well, I guess the predictable part of it is the fact that we've always been that fire is painfully consistent when it comes to defending freedom of speech. We defend it
Hmm.
for everybody all the time, no friends or favor, no matter what. And we've always been like that and been willing to lose donors over it for ever since we were founded. But in this case, because we have a lawsuit against a Trump administration policy, this is when they decide to give the favorable coverage. So it's a little bit predictable, but I'll take it.
Yeah. And tell me about your lawsuit against the Trump administration.
The Trump administration, yeah. So Marco Rubio is using a regulation that says that the Secretary of State, pretty much in his sole discretion, can kick out non-citizens from the United States if he decides that they are adverse to foreign policy. And the only time that this has been challenged in court, and it's only been one other time, it was actually ruled unconstitutionally vague and broad because it is a lot of power to give the Secretary of State. That appears to be unreviewable, and it was ruled unconstitutional by Trump's own sister back in the 90s, who was a great judge. She died, I think, in 2023. Very sad. But that ruling was overturned for completely unrelated reasons. So we think that this is just too, and it's slightly personal because both my parents, when I was born, my mom was still on a green card, like in the
Mhm.
idea that there would be no protection to for someone to decide. And I always make the point for people, on the right. It's like, yeah, do you want the left to have this power to kick out people who are pro-Israel at some point?
Mhm. Yeah, that seems like, so it's anyone on a green card.
Anyone here on a visa, anyone here on a student visa, it's anyone who's not a citizen. But
Got
it's
it.
but it's couched as adverse to foreign policy, but that doesn't that qualification doesn't mean that much when there's no way to double check that.
What are the standards when you come in on a green card? Because I married somebody, my first marriage was to a Belarusian, and I do remember that, I mean, there weren't, like, speech standards, but I do remember that they were held, you're kind of not in the same, you don't get the same rights as a citizen, do you?
When it comes to freedom of speech, there's a case called Bridget v. Wixon from 1945 that basically says that you can't deport someone for speech that would be protected for an American citizen.
Mm,
However, you can use someone's speech to decide about giving someone a green card or a visa in the first place.
got it.
So, and I point this out all the time. It's kind of like, my dad came to this country and he's fought the communists. He hates them. Like he got kicked out of school for opposing the Nazis. And if he lost his position, to become a citizen of the United States to someone who was like, yeah, overthrow the capitalists, I'd be like, yeah, no, you probably should have given it to the guy who actually loves this country.
Right.
So you can be subjective in the process, but when you have, I mean, the worst case that we've seen of this was the Ozturk case, something that Joe Rogan mentioned as well, who was the student who wrote an op-ed that was critical of Israel. Didn't agree with it, but it was basically just saying that she thought Tufts should divest from Israel. It
Uh-huh.
was pretty mainstream opinion on campus, and she was the one that where you saw the video of this young woman being shoved into a van by plainclothes officers, and then flown, almost immediately. I think for first Georgia and then Louisiana. And I was waiting to, like, what was she involved in terrorism? Was she part of a sleeper cell or something?
Yeah.
That turned out it was really literally just that op-ed, and it's like,
Wow.
no, 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 I don't. That's not okay.
What ended up happening with her?
The courts ruled in her favor. She was held. She was detained. She was held. She was imprisoned. For I think like a month,
Uh-huh.
or thereabouts. But then courts were like, no, this is not okay. She can return to Tufts.
Okay. Yeah, that seems pretty extreme.
Yeah. No, and that's the thing is sometimes people think that the weirdest thing about taking this position, Bridget, is that, like, people keep on saying it's like, well, I don't think illegal aliens should have rights in the United States, and we're kind of like, how many times did we say legally present, like, actually in what we wrote? Because there's a 1905 case that did allow you to deport someone for speech, but the reason why that case isn't that relevant is because that's for someone who is here illegally, and it's
Right.
like, yeah, if you're here illegally, they can kick you out for anything because you're not supposed to be here in the first place.
Yeah. I know that when you come in on a green card and over like, if you come in on a visa and then you're applying for a green card, you have usually a certain number of strikes that they allow you because they assume that you've already done things wrong, like overstay your visa.
Yeah,
There's some things that they allow for, and I think it's, like, up to 3 strikes that you get, if I recall. This is and you can still be applying for your green card, but I don't know, it's so strange to e e everybody is pro speech. It's so wild how you're like, "I'm pro free speech," until, like you say in the New York Times article, like, until it's not your team.
yeah,
And
and that's
thing
and oh, sorry.
No, things are just so polarized. It makes sense that you would be now, on the opposition to the Trump administration.
Well, we take everybody on. I mean, we're
Yeah.
still we're still fighting a lot of the nonsense that goes on in higher ed, because it's still going on.
Is it
Like,
still bad?
it's not as bad because I think schools are much more self-conscious about, like, how they got themselves into this problem in the first place.
Mm,
There was an amazing quote from a longtime critic, who fled to Canada, because he thought, Trump was gonna arrest him or something. This was a Yale philosophy professor, and he fled to Canada in a big showy, article, because now America, according to him, was apparently fascist. And he accused us of being responsible for creating this moral panic about free speech on campus to begin with. And it's like, dude, you just said you do not care about thousands and thousands of professors who have been punished over the years. It's
yeah.
been bad. And in my book, Canceling the American Mind, which came out in 2023, I mean, the numbers there's when you have 1 in 6 professors saying they are either been threatened with punishment or actually punished for speech,
Yep.
that's a disaster unlike we've ever seen. Those numbers are worse than McCarthyism.
Yeah, we
So
were
I do. Oh,
go
go
on.
on. It's a bad year for academic freedom so far, on campus as well, and shout downs. And to be clear, like, this was led primarily by pro-Palestinian students. The two worst years for shouting down speakers or shutting down their events, oftentimes using violence, that was 2023 and 2024. So colleges really should have cleaned up their act, decades ago, but
Mhm.
they invited, the current situation that's going on. That being said, that doesn't mean the Trump administration is empowered to do whatever it wants. There are rules around what it can do as well. So, our job is to enforce the rules when it comes to freedom of speech.
Yeah. The more I learn about freedom of speech, the more fascinated I am just by the history of it, because it is something. I think the guy who wrote the foreword to The War on Words, your new book, which I have right here and everybody should get,
David
um,
Machingama.
he wrote a book about the history of free speech, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, I realize I don't really know that much about it, the history of free speech in the world. Oh, I
It's an
do have
excellent
this
book.
book.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
I
highly
bought it
recommend
and
it.
I haven't read
He's
it
a
yet.
senior fire fellow. I'd also like to brag about that.
Okay, I did buy this book and it's next to it's in a pile of books that I've been wanting to read, but now I'm gonna bring it to the top because it
Excellent.
it seems like, Yeah, I don't it's something I take for granted. Even talking to a friend who's from Europe who's recently in town, they're, like, talking about Trump and worrying about us, and I'm like, You don't even have free speech in Germany, like, what do
They
you?"
sure do not.
Not at all. It's like
No.
but I think they it's weird that in the European relationship to America is something that I've also been contemplating a lot in terms of
Yeah.
just how kind of dysfunctional and fascinating it is. On the one hand, they look down on us from almost everything, but then
Yeah.
when they come here and criticize Trump in particular or whatever president we might have, correctly in the past are going into on false pretenses, the wars in the Middle East, but in this instance, it's like you guys you're telling me you hold us up as some beacon of hope and light and democracy, which I agree with, but you generally look down on kind of all things America. It's a very weird relationship.
It depends on what part of Europe you're into, though, because I spent most of my mom's British, my dad's
Mhm.
Russian, but grew up in Yugoslavia. But I spent a lot of my time in Eastern Europe, and Eastern Europeans tend to be a little more like, "No, these guys are good." Whereas my dad lived in Geneva for a while, which is a French-speaking city surrounded on 3 sides by France, and the sheer amount of, like, looking down on us was remarkable.
Yeah, that was something I really experienced when I went there in 2005. It was right after we invaded Iraq, and, um, I was kind of shocked at how much disdain they had for Americans, open
Yeah,
disdain, and just thinking that we're dumb, and I was like we were joking about this yesterday actually in the dumpster fire writers room, just about their weird, relationship to ICE.
yeah.
Like how they just mock us for having ice everywhere. We're like, "Oh, we're sorry, you guys." The idea of like the Euro pours always cracks me up. But they
Well, the
don't. They really don't. How free are they over there?
it's a disaster in Europe these days, and one of my goals for this year was to do a better job of trying to explain how bad it's actually gotten, not just in the countries we think of as unfree, but where AI, for example, has allowed a new level of sort of tyranny in places like Iran and places like China. But in the Anglosphere and in the EU, it's a disaster. I mean, there's this amazing piece in 60 Minutes talking about, interviewing Germans, the German police, because they do morning raids of people who, and they gave one example, very stern German, speaking people saying, yes, we did a morning raid against someone for calling a politician a penis.
Wow.
And it's like, no, that's how you're fighting fascism?
Right. That seems pretty insane. Wait,
Yeah.
go talk to me about the AI and the tyranny of AI in China and Iran.
Oh, yeah, no, Yuval Harari wrote a book that I disagree with a lot of it called Nexus,
Mhm.
but he does talk about how they use AI, to help them surveil the Iranian public. So if they find someone, who isn't wearing her headscarf right, they can they can and do turn off her car, as a way of punishing her.
Oh, wow.
And I'm like, that's a comprehensive level of tyranny.
Yeah. It does feel like we're moving more into that just everywhere in general.
Yeah, it's scary.
The
Uh,
surveil the I think the other thing I've been thinking a lot about is just how we've all opted into this surveillance state.
yeah,
There was something that was going around about kids these days and how they're not going out and they're not partying, and I was like, "How can they?"
yeah.
I snuck out and went they have trackers in their phones, they have parents
Bridget, you
putting stuff
snuck
in their
out?
sneakers, they have yeah. I mean, we used to, like, steal my dad's car in the middle of the night and, we would go be up to all kinds of shenanigans. And now you we were t I was talking about this with someone recently, just how you can't even get out of your neighborhood without everybody's Ring camera. surveilling you.
Yeah. Yeah, it's scary, and the fear for people like civil libertarians like me has always been this kind of tendency towards centralization and kind of the fear that, the future world of Star Trek, wouldn't actually look like this lovely work environment. It would look much more totalitarian because everybody's business is yours all of a sudden. But actually, that's speaking of books, we have a big season here at Fire. One,
Ooh.
one, one of my employees, Sarah McLaughlin, just came out with a book called Authoritarians in the Academy. And it's about how China, in particular, but also Qatar and several other countries, use their power to limit freedom of speech on American campuses, including tactics of like, if you're a Chinese national studying the US, and God forbid you should say something positive about Tibet, next thing you know, they're paying your family home a visit. You know,
Oh, yeah. I doubt I'd be allowed in China or, I mean, maybe, but I'm always going after them online on jokes on Dumpster Fire. We have a whole segment called Get Wrecked China, so I'm not sure. My friends
yeah,
are
I
like,
mean,
"Even if you did get in, I don't know if you'd get out."
yeah, the three countries that I really feel like I need to avoid are Russia,
Mhm.
um, longstanding opposition to KGB stooges, and China,
Mhm.
but also I think Turkey, because I say pretty harsh stuff about Erdogan a lot, and the difference between, like, Putin and Xi is I'm too small of a fish, though, that I think to, like, to be bothered with, like, in Russia or China, so I'd probably be fine, but still, it's probably best not for me to go. But Turkey is so petty about the kind of people that they'll punish. I mean, they put, like, Miss Turkey, like, in jail, for criticizing Erdogan some years ago. It's the scale of it in Turkey is really depressing, and and it's otherwise like a wonderful country.
I know, I just had a couple of family members who got back and they loved it. They said it was
Yeah,
like the best. I hear repeatedly it's one of the best trips ever.
it's gorgeous. The history is amazing, and but talking to people who were more like pro-Western in Turkey, like how sad they were that their country had become that much more authoritarian.
Yeah, there's so much. It feels like such a weird time to be a human. I've Do you agree that there's this idea that democracy only kind of lasts 250 years and then essentially the freedom, the too much freedom is kind of our own undoing. Have you heard this concept?
No, well, it's kind of a weird concept because democracy basically only existed on small scales prior to the United States.
Mm, yeah, I don't know.
Do you know whose concept it is?
No, I always hear about it where it's like, "Oh, democracy basically can't last longer than 250 years because liberalism or progressivism essentially becomes its own undoing."
Yeah,
I'm not I should probably familiarize myself more with I don't know if it's a conspiracy theory or where this idea comes from, but basically
yeah.
that all of this freedom, um, we become too free.
Well, I call my Substack the eternally radical idea because I'm always trying to remind people that freedom of speech is not liberal or conservative. It's a radical idea in every
Mhm.
generation, demonstrated by the fact that in every generation, people stand up to oppose freedom of speech. Absolutely predictably, and they're usually the censors are usually on the winning side. And me and you were lucky to have grown up at a time where free speech was kind of like on the rise. Like the American law was getting better, First Amendment law was getting stronger. More countries were liberalizing, particularly after the fall of the Berlin Wall. Like we grew up at possibly a golden age of freedom of speech. And of course, like people are like, well, it wasn't perfect. I'm like, I'm not saying it was perfect, but historically speaking, like most of history is power using its power to censor. And I think that and when people are kind of like, oh, you're looking towards some better period in time, and I'm like, I'll be damned if 2007 wasn't a better time for free speech than right now.
Interesting. And what about it right now makes it worse than 2007?
Europe has given up on it.
Free
You know,
speech?
Yeah, I mean, like,
Why have they given up on it?
um, I think it kind of got there was this great PR attempt, and it was led partially on American campuses to change the political valence of freedom of speech to a unalloyed good, something that was a human right, something that was essential to democracy, all of which is true, to something that was, well, free speech belongs to people on the left. This is Herbert Marcuse's argument because we want an equal society, but those other people shouldn't have it. And he was
Mm,
very explicit about this. And this is where hate speech theory, comes from, essentially. And these were ideas that started getting popularized on campus, in Europe as well. And and that's why, again, why I call it my blog the eternally radical idea, because this is regression to the mean. This is like, if you don't believe in free speech, the natural state is to be like, well, power here knows best, so we should punish those terrible people who say that we have. And what's going on in Europe a lot is saying that we're having immigration problems, because
yes.
that's obviously, like, you can't say that. And it's like, in a free society you should be able to say that.
And this was something interesting talking to my European friend. Anyone who expresses that is automatically right wing.
Mhm.
They're almost not just right wing, basically a Nazi.
Yeah.
And I don't know that every single person who feels that there might be problems with immigration in Europe is marching in the streets as a neo-Nazi. It seems
Yeah.
like a lot of pretty average, moderate, maybe center right people are afraid to express this opinion over there.
Yeah. I sometimes talk about one of the things that makes Europe a little different. I mean, there's a million things, but one, they look to a past, where they had authoritarianism, and sometimes with some amount of pride, in a way that America doesn't really have that to look back to, thankfully.
Right.
But but also, they have this idea of like that's kind of like, part of a country that thinks of itself as a nation state. That there's like like I said, my mom's British. That there's kind of like a modal Brit. Like there's a perfectly average idea of a British person, as if there's like a single dude, who has opinions, or lady, who has opinions or preferences, etc. And that can lead to, well, no right thinking person would say something mean like that, in a way that America is totally alien to us, because, like, we've always been a country that's like, yeah, people in Boston hate people in Richmond who have no idea who the people in Georgia are, and Californians, don't get me started. Like, we've barely ever really thought of ourselves as a singular people. We thought ourselves as, like, at our best, we think of ourselves as like a weird amalgam of very eccentrically different types of people, which is one of the things I love about America.
Mhm.
But Germany can fall into an idea that there's one or at least only a handful of ways a German should think,
Uh-huh. Like a good German.
like a good German.
Right.
And
And
that's never gotten them in trouble before.
yeah. That's fascinating. It's funny how all of these things interact even with the United States. We do live in such a global society, and
Yeah,
online you see so much of the erosion of the idea of free speech as some kind of ideal that we should still believe in, not just in academia. There's also just bot farms, and it's like other countries who are influencing the way that we think and elevating people to seem like they're more influential than they might be, so that it's I don't know how you even deal with all that as somebody in your space.
it's hard. I mean, like, I had a breakdown about it way back in 2007. It led to Coddling the American Mind, my most successful book with Jonathan Haidt. But it's not easy. But, actually, I'm not just pitching books here, but we
Pitch
just
books.
we're reprinting Ari Neyer's book Defending My Enemy, and I think it comes out in September. And this is a book that explains why, in case of Ari Nair, someone who survived the Holocaust, and why other Jewish lawyers at the ACLU were willing to defend the Nazis back in the 1970s. And it's a
Mm.
beautiful and powerful book. And we're actually working with the ACLU on this. We're reprinting it just to kind of remind people of like, yeah, this is how seriously we mean this. We mean even the kind of people who would take our free speech rights away deserve themselves, and how actually tyranny starts. It always starts with scoundrels. It always
Mm.
starts with people going after scoundrels first because everyone's like, well, those guys are jerks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that I think we were just talking about this even around that weird time in, like, 2015, 2016, 2017 when they were,
When
like,
everybody started losing their mind, you
when
mean?
everyone started losing their mind, but they were, like, debanking people like Milo,
Yeah,
they couldn't take Ubers, they couldn't I was like, "Say what you will about the guy, but this seems very sinister." I don't
yeah,
know why, and you see this stuff kind of creeping up in Canada, which is
yeah.
funny that that guy, Jason Stanley, is that who his name is?
Jason Stanley.
He was the one who I remember him fleeing to Canada. It's like they were doing crazy things when those truckers were protesting, and if you even donated to them, they would shut your bank account down and all kinds of the debanking stuff. I don't even know how you begin to kind of fight that.
And it's even worse. I mean, like, Canada, was very close to passing a law that would include life imprisonment for certain speech crimes.
Wow.
And it's one of these, like, the idea that you can look at Canada and be as, like, a comparative beacon of freedom is like, "Oh, okay, that's very diluted."
Are you dealing with an HMO like I am? It's such a pain in the butt. If I want to get any sort of testing done to ensure I'm making my health a priority, I have to wait weeks for an appointment to see my doctor, then get a referral from her, and wait weeks more for an appointment with the specialist I needed to see just to get some lab work. Quest simplifies this process. I can purchase my own lab tests online and test for a multitude of health issues I might be concerned about, then take those results to my doctor better armed with the information I need. At questhealth.com, you can get hundreds of tests across several different categories, from allergies to heart health, hormones, sexual health, women's health tests for egg quantity, perimenopause, menopause, men's health tests for testosterone, prostate, and so much more. These are lab quality tests, the same ones you'd be given at your doctor's office. So prioritize your health and visit questhealth.com today. Use the code Phetasy to get 25% off and find answers to the multitude of health questions you may have. That's questhealth.com and use the code Phetasy for 25% off. What do you think happened to Canada?
I think it lacked viewpoint diversity. I think it became. I think that essentially it became a very group thinky place. And but like I said, I think a lot of these tendencies, like, they're historical. I call it problems of comfort, because Steve Pinker is on our board. He's a friend. He's wonderful, and Steve always talks about, like, how if we keep certain things up, life is getting better on average.
Right.
And I don't really disagree with that in a lot of ways, because, although I would be fun to go back to 1997, say, if I wanted medical treatment, I'd rather, live right now than any other time in history. Um, there's lots of advantage to living now. But I made the point that there are types of problems that get worse precisely because other things are getting better. And I called them problems of comfort. And free speech is hard. Like, living with free speech, recognizing, of course, it's not hard for you to have your free speech, but it can be painful to admit that people whose opinions you hate should also have it as well. But we took that for granted as being, but without it, you don't have a democracy.
Yeah.
But as time goes by and people become more comfortable and more affluent and all this kind of stuff, you should expect that that's the kind of thing that actually gets worse. People's appreciation for freedom of speech, as people get less comfortable with discomfort, you shouldn't be surprised that free speech starts to decline, which is why, I'm going to be in business until they put me in jail.
Don't say that. That that is something that I don't know why. I would just rather know where everybody stands.
Yeah.
I I
That's
would
my whole
just
thing.
rather know what someone thinks,
Yeah.
instead of them having to hide it, and we lived through that crazy time where everybody was self-censoring, and then you have this kind of explosion in 2024 where all of a sudden people feel comfortable just going, "You know what? F you, we're tired of all this crap," after
Yeah.
a decade of it or 8 years of it, and I think Mark, Maron had a really funny joke on his recent special where he said, "We have to on the left, we have to kind of" I don't necessarily agree with him, but, he made a joke being like, "We're so annoying, we push people into, like, fascism," which
I
is
saw that. That was
very
a
rich
pretty good
coming from
line.
the left because they just can't see at all the ways in which their fascistic tendencies pushed people to the right. It
Yeah.
wasn't just like they were annoying, they were also censoring people and oppressing speech and shouting people down and not allowing viewpoint diversity, and I could go on forever, but it is funny. It is that did make me chuckle
Yeah, no, I
slightly.
thought that was a good line too. But the most frustrating thing for me on a lot of this stuff, personally, is how people on the left continue to kind of like talk about communism, like communism and fascism, as if these are like wildly different things. Because I see people who will talk about these tactics that are fascist, and then but then say like basically because it's coming from the left, it's actually coming from an anti-fascist point of view, which is like, yeah, the communists called everything anti-fascist. You're literally borrowing that directly from the communists. And guess what? And then people will try to point out like what made the communists different from the fascists. And I'm like, okay, centralization of power, belief in the efficacy of violence, rigid totalitarian presence in, like in what you're allowed to say and think. Sounds pretty fascist to me. But then they'll point out, but the Nazis were racist. And it's like, yes, they were. But if you think the Russians, weren't racist too, they weren't officially racist. But have you ever met a Russian?
Yeah.
Like, so it's like these are not different systems. These are both totalitarian systems.
But you know what I realized during COVID is that people just wanna be ruled.
Oh no,
I do feel that way.
Bridget,
I
you
feel a
trying to
little.
depress me here?
No, but I feel like COVID was a moment where I looked around and was like, "Oh, but people like being told what to do."
The funny thing is, my brain immediately went to like as cosplay, but yeah, there was something that we did on. Do you ever watch Fleabag?
I do.
I thought Fleabag was excellent. And there's in the second season, the character gives this amazing speech on wanting to be told what to do, because basically like the burden of getting things wrong just hangs over her too much. And it's a beautiful talk, and I've talked about it a lot since because it's one of these things where it's like, yeah, like if something could tell us all the right things to do, some part of us would love that. I even, like I dreamed of something that could give me perfect advice all the time. But that's one of the reasons why I see potential for AI turning into tyranny.
Totally. I was just thinking this because it's so, well, sycophantic, but it also is
Yeah,
like you turn your will over to it. Oh,
yeah.
it's like here we were talking about this the other night on Real America, which you should definitely come be. Actually, you should come if you're in town this coming week. You should next Wednesday. I would love to have you as a guest and we can talk about free
Oh,
speech.
oh, I would love
Um,
that. Is this in LA?
it's no, it's just Zoom, but it's with, Mark Halperin's network, two-way,
Oh,
so
cool.
I have a show called Real America, and we just hear from normies about. I just pick a topic, like this past week was education, but I was saying so much. We were talking about how so much of the reason that critical thinking has been outsourced and people are turning it over to AI is because the ground was already laid for that by not allowing viewpoint diversity for this past 15 years,
Yeah,
particularly in colleges and schools, and having really education being captured by just one side, that it's allowed people to it paved the way for this
yeah.
in so many respects.
Yeah, no, I agree. It's one of the reasons why Fire is doing this project with the Cosmos Institute, to fund experiments in AI that actually defend viewpoint diversity, defend truth seeking, actually try to promote freedom of speech. Because the potential for this to be the way I say it, that it kind of like curls the toes of anybody who knows my work over the last 25 years, is we must not let the same people who messed up knowledge creation in higher ed be the same people deciding what objective reality looks like for the operating system of the planet.
Right. Yeah, it's
It's
like a whole
okay,
new
Bridget.
world. I mean, to your point too, I've been thinking this whole school is back in session. This was something that came up on Real America was
Yeah,
the cell phone bans, which I'm kind of like, guys, I feel like we're a little late to that party. Like, shouldn't we've
yeah,
had that discussion like 15 years ago? I feel like this is one area where Jonathan and I may not see eye to eye because
yeah,
I agree that they're extremely distracting. I don't know that they should have ever been let in, but as people like Kat D, I don't know that I agree with Taylor Lorenz because she pushes back against this, but Kat D kind of makes the argument that you can then keep pushing this to just censorship in general. It kind of paves the way for the kids to get used to not being able to use their social media or their phones and become even more tolerant of a certain level of censorship. This is a
yeah,
little bit of their argument. I think just we have AI and you guys are worrying about cell phones. Like, don't we need to just reinvent education completely from the ground up?
yeah,
Shouldn't we be more worried about it? Feels very like, I don't know. It feels like a
yeah.
problem we should have been addressing like 15 years ago.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to be both the co-author of Coddling the American Mind and a civil libertarian, um,
Mm.
because but it means my opinion on this stuff is complex. And a cool thing actually, Coddling the American Mind, the original article came out 10 years ago this month.
Oh, wow.
And it's nice to revisit kind of all the things we saw coming
Yeah.
and still be kind of like, people are still, hostile to it, and it's kind of like, well, we kinda saw coming that a disaster for mental health among young people, a
Yep.
disaster for free speech, and a
Yep.
right-wing backlash.
Yep.
What were we wrong about again,
Yeah, exactly.
here? But when it comes to the cell phone stuff, here's my overall position. The I think it's pretty clear from the data that particularly for a subset of girls, social media can be really bad.
Mhm.
Um, However, what does that mean the government gets to do with it? That's the primary responsibility, of parents to
Yep.
deal with that. However, I am very pro keeping cell phones out of schools for the same reason that you shouldn't have had a TV on your desk, like when you were in when you were in high school, because you'd watch the TV the whole time.
Right.
Because just by virtue alone of it being distracting, check them in at the beginning of the day. There's no First Amendment issue there. Go for it. However, there was a recent decision that I wasn't surprised by at all, saying that because I saw this coming, and I've been saying this for probably decades in First Amendment circles, or at least a decade, that there's an old First Amendment case called New York v. Ginsburg that basically said that it's okay within the First Amendment to have a law that requires you to put what we used to call the nudie mags, like to not sell those to kids. But when it came to online stuff, there was a lot of resistance to any kind of verification for age verification online for good privacy based reasons. But the Supreme Court finally said, even for this, I think, deeply flawed Texas law, that to keep kids off porn, you can have some kind of age verification for that. Our concern at Fire was that it go no further than that, because that's grounded in existing law that you can take
Mhm.
steps to keep kids off porn. That doesn't bother me that much. It bothers me some. I care about the rights of adults
Right.
more than anybody else. But what I do not like one bit is the idea that that people are very quickly parlaying this into identification to use social media, identification to use essentially the internet. because
Right.
that to me is the tyrannical potential of that scares the hell out of me. So it does actually, and it's the one criticism I have of because I adore John Haidt, just to be clear. Like, he's a
Yeah.
wonderful person. But on this one, it's like, listen, I'm the civil libertarian. Like, an internet that you can't use unless you show ID is
But
not good.
even social medias require this.
Yeah.
X requires it now. If you want to a certain degree, you have to show your ID, and I think Meta probably does on some, maybe not Meta, but some social medias do. I know there was a big backlash when Elon was requiring this on X to
Yeah. I
be
mean,
verified or something like that.
can a private company choose to do it on its own? Entirely different.
Mhm.
That's okay. But if you suddenly say you cannot operate a social media company without having some kind of age verification, on it, even if it's not directed at kids, is like, okay, that's basically because what that means is that essentially everybody has
Right.
to show ID to use the
And
internet.
that's
Now,
what they did in Texas?
they that law initially required you to be able to have to show like a driver's license essentially to see porn, and it's kind of like, my general counsel, Ronnie London at Fire, does this experiment a lot because he's like this. He'll be giving a talk. He's like, "Okay, how many people in the room use porn?" And like, two wise asses' hands will go up out of 200. He's like, "Huh, that's statistically highly unlikely."
Right.
Um, and now can you see why you don't necessarily want people have to self-identify if they wanna watch porn? And I think he makes that case well. And this is something I gotta credit to Height as well. I do think that a big smart thing here to do, in light of this, is to try to figure out the most privacy protective ways of doing age verification. If this is gonna be a reality, particularly for porn, then there's ways you can do it. There's no perfect way to do it, but there's ways you can better protect it. However, is this is this also going to play into the hands of every dictator in the world, or for that matter, the European Union, to control as much speech as they can? Yeah, it's gonna.
Yeah. I mean, that's in the same way that social media is bad for teenage girls, there's a lot of evidence showing that porn is very bad for teenage boys.
Yeah,
So, I'm very resistant to, like, for the children argument, that we
yeah,
must think of the children because it always ends up, uh, not being about the children. I was wondering too, I believe in our lifetime, we will live to see the fight to have the ability to drive. Like, I think they're gonna make the argument that it's much safer when all of the cars on the road are
yeah,
self-driving robots
yep,
because they're faster, they can all interact, whatever, and I think there will be a lot of people who agree with that and are fine with it, and then there will be people who are like, "No, I want the ability to be able to drive on my own wherever I want." I mean, my husband and I talk about this all the time. We don't even think that
yeah,
our daughter will need to get a license,
yeah,
but that's
yeah.
kind of unsettling.
It's kind of funny because,
Ye
like, those surveys where they ask people what percentile they are for drivers, and everybody thinks they're in like the top 25%.
Uh-huh.
I'm one of the people who knows I'm a terrible driver. I've lived in cities for the most part. Like, I'm just not that good. I'm also a daydreamer. So
Right.
a big part of me is like really psyched about the idea of, getting into a car and being like, take me to, I don't know, Ohio.
Right.
That sounds swell. But yeah, you're right. The potential for tyranny there is scary.
Yeah, because, I equate so much of the
Freedom.
idea of freedom with
Yeah,
driving.
absolutely. Yeah.
And now it's like everything's tracked and they can just shut down your car if you there does seem to be a lot like you said, it's already happening in countries where there's tyranny. It does
Yeah.
seem like, I don't know, but I don't know if that's not a free speech fight. What would that even be? How do you even fight that?
Oh, but that's a point that I make my libertarian friends at Reason very happy, saying, is just there's something fundamental about America that we have, or at least had, a libertarian core. That's what sort of classical liberalism is that power should not be in charge of everything.
Mhm.
Even if you're going to make mistakes, with your freedom, it's yours. Period. I think Milton Friedman had a great quote about if you can't abuse it, it's not really a right, which
Uh,
I thought was well said. But I think that we're at risk of losing that kind of like core libertarianism because there used to be a libertarianism, like a civil libertarianism on the left, and that's the old ACLU, and a strong libertarianism on the right as well, and that's been to a degree largely sort of like replaced with populism. And my fear is that without that libertarian core, we're just like everybody else, and I mean that in the bad way.
mm. Yeah, I see it slipping away in the younger generations. I definitely feel it when I'm on stage. It's like, this I and some of it is just being older and trying to relate to people who are younger and not having the same experience at all. But some of it is just, it's like it's almost like they're another, um,
Species.
species. Yeah. That's how it feels a lot
Yeah.
of the time, especially when I'm trying Gen Z guys get me. I mean, even last night, a 22-year-old was like, You're hilarious. I love you."
Mhm.
But they're the millennials, I always know when I'm, like, bombing, I'm like, "Are you guys millennials?" And it's like, oh, they'll all raise their hands. I'm like, "I knew it. Fucking millennials hate me." They hate me, but they
That
have such a different ethos. They were raised in such a, like, the safe spaces and that idea of yeah, it does seem like they're when you poll these people and say, like, "Do you think free speech is important?" They'll be like, not really."
Yeah.
It's
Well, and we saw this in our own polling, like, before we expanded into because we used to be the foundation for individual rights in education, but then we expanded to end expression, because we now, serve the entire country for
Mhm.
freedom of speech, and it's it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the things that we found was that right or left, if you were over, I guess it would be probably almost close to 50 now, but at the time, that if you're over about 45, you tended to be pretty good on free speech, um, even, on the left as well. And if you were below, say, 30-ish, you just didn't know that much about it.
Right.
So that would be more like Gen Z. So we called the over 45 the reachables. We called the under 30 the teachables,
But what's
and
the 30 to 45? The
the
people who hate me.
into deepables, the ones
Oh.
who believe, just how we talked about, like, um, uh, Europe kind of developing a sort of anti-free speech morality.
Yes.
That's kinda more the way it went, and the thing that they don't get is, like, yes, that's Victorianism. Like, Victorianism is essentially like an upper class movement where essentially it's like, "Well, we know what moral truth is, and you shouldn't say that."
Mhm, mhm. Tell me about your book, The War on Words.
Oh, it's so cool. I mentioned one Fire senior fellow, Jacob Mishingama, but, our other senior fellow is the great Nadine Strawson.
Mhm.
This is someone I met in law school. I could barely talk to her because I was like, "Oh my god, Nadine Strawson." And now she actually works for Fire,
Wow.
which is just she likes to make me uncomfortable by calling me boss sometimes when we're on stage, and I'm like, "Don't do that. That's just weird for me."
Yeah.
But she's one of my heroes. She's one of the great defenders of free speech, kind of all time. She was the head of the ACLU. I think she was the president of the board of the ACLU until 2007. She had a very long tenure there during like some of its proudest moments, the most consistent moments for free speech. And we got a little, Nadine's so much nicer than me, too. Like, I feel so grumpy, like when I'm around her, like just in like just because comparatively I feel grumpy because she's so positive. But as I explained it, I just got tired of making these same 10 arguments, hearing these same 10 arguments against freedom of speech. So we started doing a series where I'd answer it and she'd answer, like, what's the argument to speech is violence, for example, or free speech is a right wing idea, like all of these kind of tired old bad arguments against freedom of speech. And we started a series that we did maybe back in 2022, but we decided to put it into a book to update it with new data. And so, yeah, if there are arguments that you hear all the time about freedom of speech, we address the most common ones in here.
Yeah, the one that I realized I don't know very much about, and I don't know if there's legal precedent, is the shout downs.
Yeah.
Is that considered free speech?
No.
Yeah.
Nope. That's good old fashioned mob censorship.
Mhm.
And I was embarrassed, honestly, for other alleged sort of free speech advocates when they were kind of like, "Whoa, the students are just exercising their free speech rights to shout someone down." Now,
Mhm.
if you're saying that someone said, like you like someone comes up and speaks and someone goes boo, like, you know, big deal. Like, and
Right.
you kick them out, that's not showing a great deal of tolerance. But if someone's doing what's actually been happening on campus, which is shouting so that nobody else can hear, literally getting up and blocking things, sometimes resorting to violence,
Right.
like, that's not okay. That's mob censorship, and power has a duty, if it cares about freedom of speech, to stop the mob censors, because those mob censors are saying, because I don't like what you have to say, none of these other people are allowed to hear you. That's authoritarian thinking.
And is
Um,
there legal precedent that is yeah,
yeah, that essentially, power is supposed to have a duty to stop,
mob censorship?
stop mob censorship. Like, and there's a great line about how it functions as censorship against people who are not popular with bottle throwers. You don't let that's where the whole heckler's veto idea comes from. It's
Uh-huh.
like you don't let somebody else decide for you that you're not allowed to go to this talk.
What's the most common one that you hear?
The most common one is basically, but isn't, that hate speech is not free speech, and that's the success of the sort of like the whole hate speech movement over the last following decades. And my response to it is, knowing people's opinion is absolutely essential to understand the world as it is. You are flying blind
Mhm.
without it. You are not safer for knowing less about what people really think. So even if someone is a bigot, it's valuable to know that for a fact. But also, once you give censorship this kind of like heroic moral valence, next thing you know, you're knocking down people's doors to arrest them for calling a politician a penis. It's power that then gets to decide who is hateful and who isn't. And guess what? They use it in the interest of power itself
Right.
over and over and over again. So hate speech is, I think of hate speech as kind of a con, like more or less like, but we've all, like, so many people have fallen for it. So many young people think hate speech is already not protected. And it's like, no, I'm sorry. Like, one, bigots have free speech rights too, but it's amazing how quickly, if you basically say Nazis don't have freedom of speech, we all watch what happened. Suddenly, everybody's a Nazi. It's kind of like the
Mhm.
people who are so proud of like the fact that I'll punch Nazis, and next thing you know, they're just punching people like Ron Paul.
Right. And he does have a punchable face, though. No, I'm just kidding. I'm kidding. Um,
My Ron Paul friends.
no, no, I'm
Don't be
kidding.
mad. Don't be mad. But Ron Paul fan friends.
I have a habit of making jokes at the wrong time.
Nah, nah.
Um,
I know some good First Amendment lawyers, Bridget. I can help you out.
yeah, the speech is violence one was, uh, just seems very obvious to me. What's the other one that was in here that I found really well, they're all really interesting, the shout downs. Um, oh, yeah, the crowded theater and the marketplace of ideas, that's another good one about the
Crowded theater, right?
Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide,
Oh
that
my
because
god.
Holocaust denial is illegal in, many, many places in Europe, right?
Oh, yeah, and people still act like it's, well, of course you would make that illegal, and it's kinda like, why would you make the single easiest argument in the world to refute illegal?
It makes
Um
it only lends more fuel to the conspiracy theorists.
Yes! I've said this so many times. If you're fighting people who believe there's a conspiracy to shut them up, do absolutely nothing that looks like a conspiracy to shut them up.
Mhm. Yep.
Because the only way you can actually convince people that the Holocaust didn't happen is if you don't actually have to defend your assertion that the Holocaust didn't happen. Because it's really easy to prove that it did.
Yeah. So I wanna have the other people at Fire who have books out on the podcast. I would love to talk to them, so please put
Oh,
me
we'd
in
love
touch with
that.
them. That would be
Yeah,
great.
yeah.
What
I
what do you see as the biggest if you were gonna do a coddling of the American mind part 2,
yeah.
what are the trends you're noticing? The things that are playing out that give you heartburn at night?
I think the biggest story right now is not anything that's happening outwardly in the world of politics. I think it's we're in the moment of training AI. And we have to get this right, or it can be a tool of tyranny, or it can be a tool of, a very positive tool for humanity. And I think all the time about, I believe personally, we're sitting on a giant corpus of human knowledge, particularly that generated by higher ed, that is very weak, and is not on that was the product of groupthink and sometimes p hacking and sometimes plagiarism and all this kind of stuff. And I think that we need to increase friction. We need institutions, clubs, people, basically kind of like when research comes out that kind of like confirms everything that people think in higher ed already. There needs to be people there to test it and kick the tires, because you can't just trust that peer review is going to do that anymore. You can't just trust that their department's going to do it. People doing replications are frowned upon. So I want to make sure that we defend truth and truth seeking, and I think there's ways to do it, but we have to take a lesson from the founding fathers who believed, James Madison, freaking genius, that ambition must be made to counteract ambition, that you need a system there to be kind of like, listen, I know you're asserting all these things, and guess what? We're going to check them all.
Yeah.
And we can do that now with AI, and we should be doing that with AI. With AI.
That's one of the things that's I've been thinking about too is with the replication crisis and all of this knowledge that it's being trained on, isn't a lot of it gonna be incorrect?
Oh yeah, a lot of it is going to be incorrect.
And so many people just use this as their Google search basically now.
Yeah, yeah, no, and that's, I mean, my old test used to be seeing how they talk about communism versus fascism. I've noticed they've gotten somewhat better, on that, but certainly at first, like you'd have like all of the sins of the Nazis correctly explained, and then the sins of like the Soviets, kind of like, oh well, they meant well. Their hearts were in the right place.
Like, but that's actually that's just clear that they did a bad job in general educating people about the horrors of communism.
Yeah.
Even when you see, these protesters that even back in 2017, 2016, you would see these kind of Antifa protesters and they'd have the hammer and the sickle flag, and you're like, and I this was back when my ex-husband was still alive from Belarus, and he was like, he would say to me, "Bridget, don't these people know what that means?" Like, clearly not. Clearly they
Yeah, they
have no
don't.
idea what it means.
Well, it's partially because, it was thinking that, a lot of people in academia had the choice of being like, okay, I guess we made a real mistake for so many of us being pro that. Let's have a reckoning, as they would say, and figure out what we did wrong and start over with some of this stuff.
But
But
was
there's,
it I guess my question is, was it the McCarthy kind of push against weeding out all the commies and finding all the communists and the encroachment on free speech in that area that made people slightly defensive or less worried about communism?
Well, I look at, I wrote a lot about this, on ERI, I actually have something that's talking about the Red Scare,
Mhm.
the second McCarthyism, the second Red Scare, and just making the point that people had reason to be freaked out.
Right.
Like American and British spies gave Super Hitler, Stalin, the bomb. Gave him both bombs, in fact, much faster than they ever should have had then. And you would be freaked out too if you were in that circumstance too. It doesn't defend, like, some of the people who really suffered under McCarthyism, who, by the way, incidentally, were wildly disproportionately gay people.
Mhm.
Because they were seen as sort of like a security threat because they could be blackmailed. But Jamie Kirchick wrote about this
Oh,
in
yeah.
Secret City. Great book.
It's so good. He came on actually and talked about
Oh,
that book. It was
such a good
fascinating.
such a good book.
Yeah.
But I mean, but there was a lot of sympathy for communism, among the professorate. And one of the arguments that they made in the 1950s was essentially like, listen, like these are people who are actually deeply closed-minded. That essentially, like, they believe in this thing like they believe in a religion, and that's one of the reasons why we think it actually could be a threat to academic freedom to have too much of this ironclad ideology, taught as if it were truth itself. And I think that the 1957 decision in Sweezy v. New Hampshire, saying that you shouldn't be academic freedom means you shouldn't be firing professors for their political opinion, is correct. But I do also think that there are a lot of unreflective people in academia who are kind of like, well, with slight changes around the edges, they're essentially like, well, but basically, Marx and Lenin were right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Is and that's the kind of arrogance where it's kind of like it was proved so disastrously wrong. The smartest people in all of Russian society and Chinese society tried to make it work and they couldn't. And you're arrogant enough to not admit that maybe you and your mentor were wrong about your utopian ideas. And that's how we end up with a situation where young people are surprisingly positive about the history of socialism. So much so we've got, well, I'm probably getting a little too partisan on this one. So,
No, it's just interesting to me that it's like, a lot of people died, but it doesn't I don't know if it's because it wasn't like a systemic operation versus just millions of people starving that
yeah.
I don't know why it doesn't hit the same way.
Well, I think it's political bias. I think that
Mhm.
people tend to just gloss over what a nightmare it was, and a lot of that starving was intentional. I mean,
Right.
Holodomor, like in Ukraine, like that was Stalin was trying to starve the Ukrainians.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well,
Oh, makes me sad when you're sad, though, Bridget.
I'm not sad.
Okay.
I'm weirdly optimistic, and having a child forces that.
Oh, and I would like to say that's a very nice color.
Thank you. The color of the wall?
No, 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 your frock.
Oh,
What do you
my
call
sweater
ladies?
shirt. Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you. We redid our when we started Real America, we just, like, changed our whole entire set to be, like, a diner vibe, which is my roots, and so, yeah, I love the new set so much, but it's definitely not the, like, Instagram aesthetic of just, like, beige and whatever, something simple.
I started
I'm
working
not
in restaurants when I was
I'm going the opposite way of Cracker Barrel.
11.
I was joking
Yeah,
about this last night. I'm like, and yesterday on Dumpster Fires, like this, it's so American to have people just outraged about Cracker Barrel. Like
yeah.
a freaking factory, American factory just got bombed in Ukraine, and Trump wants to get like have the government invest in like a percentage of Intel. Are you following that at all? It's
I
it's
did, yeah, that
not great, and all of these like
we'll
things are
give our enemies the super weapon, but we gotta cut.
what?
I said, we'll give our enemies our super weapons, but we gotta cut,"
Yeah.
which is like, I don't know how
Yeah,
I feel about
there's just, like, all of these things happening, and we're like, "Let's get mad about Cracker Barrel."
that.
That seems like where we should.
It did seem colossally stupid, though.
No, it was really dumb. I don't
Yeah.
I think it's more, the kind of corporate sanitization that has happened with every single brand that people are reacting to, which does
Yeah.
feel kinda commie.
It's still Kentucky Fried Chicken, damn it.
What's keeping you up at night
Um, oh man, so many things. Um, you know,
other than
uh,
AI, which I think is
yeah,
keeping everyone up at night?
AI definitely worries me. What's keeping me up at night is the idea that free speech will be under increased threat the more sort of comfortable society becomes, and that we really got to fight hard for it, and we really got to make a better case for it. We really got to get people to understand, because it's dead or dying in Europe. Certainly in some countries, it's dead. Um, you know, uh, small L liberalism. I don't mean leftism, but I mean like the idea of freedom and freedom of speech is it's in trouble.
Mhm.
And we need all the help we can, and it's got to be a process by which you start taking back some ground. Like there's got to be a free speech movement in the UK. There's got to be one in Canada. There's got to be because fire in the United States have been alone sometimes. But I think that it's the kind of thing that unless you start winning back some ground, the free speech could be in real trouble.
Well, thank you for all your work. What's your
It's great to
biggest
see you, Bridget.
Yeah, you too. What's your biggest defect of character?
My biggest defective character, I have so many. Um, God, I'm impatient. Definitely, I like to be in constant motion. I have a hard time like not checking my emails like when I'm in a podcast.
Uh-huh.
Like I think I just got in trouble for that on a recent one. Um, I'm definitely super duper hard on myself. That there's benefits to it, but I definitely, like I spent like this whole past 2 weeks really worried that this New York Times piece was just going to be a hit piece and a disaster. And even if it was, what was helpful about me worrying about it?
Yeah, exactly.
But
Yeah.
yeah, we can do a whole episode on my defects.
And what's your biggest asset?
Enthusiasm. I think I am. There is still some part of me that's in love with the world.
Yeah. I love that line. Well, thank you. Where can we find you and your book?
At thefire.org. You can also find me at my Substack, The Eternally Radical Idea. And we are featuring now The War on Words with Nadine Strawson. The defending my I got this wrong. And then, of course, let's not forget Sarah's great book, Authoritarians in the Academy.
I wanna talk to her.
You should. She's great.
Yeah. I'd
And
love
her name is Sarah McLachlan, like the singer.
Easy to remember. Well, thank you so
Exactly.
much for your time.
Lovely seeing you, Bridget.
You too. This has been Walk-Ins Welcome with Bridget Phetasy. I'm Bridget Phetasy, and you're welcome. It's the dumbest line.